Hello and welcome back. We continue our anatomy and physiology tour with chapter 34, Neurons, Sense Organs, and Nervous Systems. I'll be highlighting the basics of neurons and how nervous systems are structured. So don't be nervous, let's hop right in and get started. Animals need a way to transmit signals within their bodies at high speeds. This is where neurons come in. Neurons can transmit signals from 20 to 100 meters per second. A neuron is pictured above. Neurons are said to be excitable cells. This means that they can generate and transmit electrical signals. These signals are called action potentials. Cell membranes have electrical polarity, with the outside being more positive than the inside. An impulse or action potential, which is the electrical signal, is a state of reversed polarity. In an excitable cell, like a neuron, an action potential generated at one point propagates over the whole membrane. A region of depolarization moves along the cell and the membrane is said to conduct the impulse. This is a general illustration of an action potential moving along an excitable cell. As mentioned before, the outside of the cell is positive, with the inside being more negative. An action potential is transmitted along the cell as the polarity of the membrane switches from positive to negative. This is what will transmit the signal across the cell. Neurons, also called nerve cells, are adapted to generate electrical signals in the form of action potentials. Neurons must make contact with the target cell, as we will see later in the lecture. Synapse is the cell-to-cell contact point specialized for signal transmission. It is the point between two neurons, with a little bit of distance between them. The signal will transmit between this space, which is called the synapse. The picture above illustrates this concept. A signal arrives at the synapse by the way of the presynaptic cell and leaves by the way of the postsynaptic cell. Most neurons have four regions. The dendrites, which are root-like structures, carry signals to the cell body. The cell body is a large area of the neuron with the nucleus and organelles. The axon is the long cord-like structure that conducts action potentials away from the cell body. This can be very long depending on the neuron. Presynaptic axon terminals make contact with other cells and will transmit the signal to another neuron. Here's a picture of two neurons in close proximity to one another. The hairy-looking dendrites are found on top, which will receive an action potential. The cell body is a large structure with a nucleus. The axon is a long, skinny structure that conducts the signal to the axon terminals, where the signal will cross the synapse and go to the postsynaptic cell. A neuron will innervate the cells that the axon terminals contact. Axons of many neurons often travel together in bundles called nerves. Nerves refer to axon bundles outside the brain and spinal cord. Within the spinal cord and brain, bundles of neurons are called tracts. Glial cells, which are also part of the nervous system, are not excitable, meaning they do not transmit action potentials. They do have several functions, however. They help orient neurons toward their target cell during embryonic development. They provide metabolic support for neurons, and they help regulate the composition of extracellular fluids and assist in signal transmission across synapses. Oligodendrocytes are glial cells that insulate axons in the brain and spinal cord. Schwann cells insulate axons outside the areas of the brain and spinal cord. The glial membranes form a non-conductive sheath called myelin. Here is a picture of a neuron wrapped in myelin. Myelin's function is to insulate the axons. Here's our first progress check. Please take your time to answer these questions and move on with the lecture when ready. Neurons make nervous systems, and animals have developed different organizations of neurons. The cnidarians, which were some of the first multicellular organisms, have developed what are called nerve nets. These are the most simple types of nervous systems. Evolution of nervous systems followed two major trends. Centralization is the integration of neurons to become clustered in centralized organs, such as the brain and spinal cord. Cephalization is the major integrating areas that become concentrated toward the anterior end of the animal. This interior end, or head region, eats the environment first, so the sensory organs are often concentrated there. This picture of the dog and grasshopper shows that they have neurons grouped towards the anterior region, which illustrates cephalization. Next, we're going to look at how neurons are organized within animals. The central nervous system, or CNS for short, is composed of the brain and spinal cord. The CNS is composed mostly of neurons and glial cells. It must interact with sensors and effectors. Effectors are cells or tissues that perform actions that carry out orders, such as muscle cells. The peripheral nervous system, or PNS, are neurons outside the central nervous system. They bring sensory information from sense organs to the central nervous system. The PNS also carries orders from the central nervous system to effectors. Nerves in the PNS are bundles of axons that transmit signals. There are different types of neurons classified on their location and their function. Interneurons are neurons that are confined to the central nervous system. Sensory neurons are neurons that carry signals from sensory cells to the central nervous system, also called afferent neurons. Efferent neurons carry signals from the central nervous system to muscles and other effectors. The above picture demonstrates afferent neurons carrying signals from the receptors to the central nervous system, and efferent neurons carrying signals from the central nervous system to an effector such as a muscle. Motor neurons carry signals to skeletal muscles. The autonomic nervous system, or ANS, controls effectors other than skeletal muscles. These are called autonomic effectors. Examples of these autonomic effectors would be smooth muscles and organs, exocrine glands, some endocrine glands, acid-secreting cells within the stomach. The autonomic nervous system has three divisions. The enteric division, which are nerve cells internal to the gut wall. The sympathetic division, which prepares the body for emergencies, sometimes called the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic division, which slows the heart, lowers blood pressure, and increases digestion. Figure 34.22 illustrates which organs and functions fall under the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. Next, we're going to look at how a signal travels from the central nervous system through an autonomic afferent pathway. The autonomic afferent pathway begins with the preganglionic neurons with cell bodies within the central nervous system. The axon of these preganglionic neurons synapse on a second neuron outside the central nervous system in a collection of nerve cell bodies called ganglion. The second neuron is called postganglionic, and its axon leaves the ganglion and synapses in the target organs. Parasympathetic preganglionic neurons, which lower blood pressure and heart rate, exit the central nervous system from the brain and sacral regions of the spinal cord. These ganglia are near the target organs. Sympathetic preganglionic neurons, which are responsible for the fight or flight response, exit the central nervous system at the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord. Most of these ganglia lie next to the spinal cord. Sympathetic postganglionic neurons use norepinephrine as a neurotransmitter. Norepinephrine raises blood pressure, dilates pupils, and stops digestion. The parasympathetic postganglionic neuron uses acetylcholine, which counteract norepinephrine. In organs that receive both inputs, the target cells usually respond in opposite ways. The sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions often work in opposition. Acting together, they can adjust effector functions up or down as needed. Example: sympathetic stimulation of the pacemaker causes the heart rate to increase, and parasympathetic stimulation causes it to decrease. The fight or flight response is an effect of the sympathetic division. When activated, it increases the heart rate, force of contraction, and cardiac output, dilates lung passageways, and increases release of glucose from the liver. At the same time, it reduces less urgent activities such as digestion. Many neurons that control skeletal muscles enter or leave the central nervous system within spinal nerves. Spinal nerves have both sensory and motor neurons. Figure 34.23 shows the location of spinal nerves connecting to the spinal cord. These spinal nerves are responsible for both sensory, afferent, and motor, efferent neurons. With that last piece of information, we are done with Chapter 34. I thinned a bit out of this chapter. As you read and study, focus on what we go over in the PowerPoint, as we just touch the surface of the nervous system. Please take your time with these questions and let me know if anything is unclear. Thank you for listening and have a good rest of your day.